I have 1, 2. I think I have 2 via phone. I have a, yep, I have a 621 number and a 960.
Do you need them to kind of announce themselves so you can get them on the roster?
Correct.
Okay. You said a 920?
Yeah.
This is Kelsey Werman. I'm
Okay.
just in the field, so I'll be in my office and I'll switch over to my computer.
Okay. And a 621, was it?
Yep.
This is Chelsea.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm the 960 number. And this is Chelsea Forehead from Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. The link that was forwarded to me didn't work for some reason, so I joined via phone.
I apologize for that. I'm sorry. If you could also send me an email, those of you that called in, that would be helpful as well. So I have your spelling of your name and your guys' group correctly. And Chelsea, maybe if I can get you the link sent correctly then too, maybe.
And I'll
try to. Sorry, is this Tammy speaking?
This is Tammy. Yep.
Okay, I'll email you right now. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry.
Yep. No, you're fine. Thank you.
I forwarded Chelsea the meeting invite, so hopefully she can get on. And I think, yeah, so, all right. Okay, I think we're going to, oh, Laurel, did you mean to raise your hand?
Yes, I just wanted to say that Kenny Dinan couldn't make it today, so this is Laurel Badura.
Okay. Thanks, Laurel. I think we're going to forego introductions just to save a little time, but if you, there's a little blue box next to the red telephone. I think you can, everybody can open that and see who's on the call. Is that correct, Tammy?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. Okay. Just so folks can see who is on the call. Appreciate you all joining us this morning for the Wildlife Subcommittee meeting. My name is Eric Zock. I'm the Ag Program Manager for the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. I'm also the chair of the Wildlife Subcommittee of the State Tech Committee. And like I said, I welcome you all. Tammy Nordman is helping us with the Teams meeting today. And Connor, you want to introduce yourself right off the bat, since you're going to be up here soon?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Good morning. My name is Connor Ward. I am the EQIP Program Manager for NRCS. I work a lot with Eric here, particularly with wildlife in conjunction with Game and Parks, and working on the wind pool and anything EQIP that we work with Game and Parks on. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Connor. I'm going to share my agenda here quickly, and then we'll jump right in. All right. So hopefully, Connor, can you see that?
I can.
Okay, great. And I'll bump it up a little bit. So this is a pretty laid back meeting, lots of discussion, light on the presentations. So we want, feedback and discussion from the participants. So we'll start off after these introductions with kind of a Wildlife Initiative Nebraska update from Connor. And we'll talk about a few things there that were different for last year. Then we'll go into a Eastern Sandhills Working Lands for Wildlife update from Ryan. From there, we'll move into kind of a new initiative, a new, I guess, way of looking at Eastern Red Cedar and other woody invasive control in the Great Plains. And then last, we're we'll finish up with kind of a discussion regarding a new screening tool and kind of discuss going forward ranking, scoring, anything that folks have related to WIN, and get you out of here by 11:30. So I will stop sharing. Connor, I guess from here you can, how do I stop my sharing? Did that stop my sharing?
It did.
Okay, great. So you can take it away.
All right. Give me a couple seconds to start sharing on my end. Can you see that okay, Eric?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, I really just have one slide here, just to give the group kind of an update on where we're at with the WIN ranking pool for EQIP. So that's Wildlife Initiative Nebraska. Just to give a little background, I'm sure Eric will touch on this as well, but in RCS, we have a obligation to dedicate 10% of our EQIP funds that we receive in a fiscal year towards wildlife. So Nebraska, we typically receive around a $25 million EQIP general allocation. And we got around that this year as well. So that comes out to the number you see there in the first bullet, 2,420,000. And the bell ringers, so to speak, that we need to hit, or that ring the bell, I guess, towards that 10% that's tracked at the NRCS national headquarters. The things that they look at to ensure or see where states are at as far as meeting that 10% goal. That includes any contract that gets obligated within a state designated wildlife 10% ranking pool account. So that is why we have a separate wildlife ranking pool established here in Nebraska. One of the reasons to try and meet this 10% goal. And then also those bell ringers also include a list of 17 core, what headquarters has designated as wildlife friendly practices that can be included in any ranking pool throughout the state. So that's just a little bit of a background to give you on what the bell ringers for those are. So to give a rundown of where we're at this year, we received a total of 114 applications throughout the state for the WIN ranking pool. And currently we've pre-approved or obligated 91 of those applications. And we have a remaining balance in WIN of $150,000 currently. So the third bullet there, to give you a little bit of just some context there, March 24th was the date after the ranking deadline. The ranking deadline is an established date that field offices have to take all their applications they've received and rank those applications to be then considered for funding by a program manager such as myself. We pre-approve the applications throughout all the NRDs since this is a statewide fund pool. Some of those, so with the 2.4 million that we had and allocated towards WIN, March 24th, I pre-approved up to that amount, and as things work, applications and applicants, they receive notification that they have a pre-approved application, and sometimes they back out. They don't wish to continue on with the contract. And that sometimes takes some time for them to decide that. So in the meantime, it's kind of a continual process throughout the summer of, as we get cancellations, well, then we move on down by a ranking score to the next eligible application, with the end goal being to use up that $2.4 million towards wildlife. And in the mix between there, some of these applications are eligible for multiple pools. So some of those applications where they're competing in WIN or other pools, they can get picked up or approved elsewhere for funding in another pool. So those application numbers can kind of rise or dip depending on the time that we have to actually pre-approve those applications and where we're at in the process. So that's why, we've approved every single application that we have on hand as of right now. And that's kind of the difference of why, we received 114 right off the bat, but 91 applications are currently pre-approved or obligated. So I just wanted to make that clear, give that little distinction there. So 91 applications across 18 NRDs. And currently we funded everything we've had on hand. And I kind of did a little breakdown. I didn't get NRD specific. I could do that if that's requested at some point, but I just went by our NRCS areas. So Central NRDs, East NRDs, West NRDs, those numbers there are what is pre-approved and obligated throughout our 3 NRCS areas. And I also want to hit on how the ranking pool was established this year through CART. So for those of you in the group that might not have any familiarity with CART or our new ranking business tool, we transitioned to CART, which stands for Conservation Assistance Ranking Tool, last year in FY20. So a brand new business tool. And there's a little bit of a learning curve with it in as far as setting up the ranking tools and kind of learning what we could and couldn't do with it. And I won't get into too much of the detail what that all consists of, but one part I did want to hit on this year, for all of our state pools, our current ranking business tool system would have had to, in order to get NRD applications to be funded with just NRD, the same NRD applications, there was no way to do that in our previous ranking business tool. But with CART, there's a categories functionality. So what the categories functionality enables us to do essentially is create 23 different NRD categories. We have 23 NRDs in Nebraska. And by categorizing them out, we can essentially only rank those NRD applications within their own NRD. Whereas before, it was competition for these funds just across the state, all one big pot being thrown in together. So the benefits that I'm trying to portray of setting them up as categories in these state pools this year, particularly WIN, is we can go by ranking score, by NRD, as opposed to every application being thrown together across the state with one another. So that kind of gives us some more flexibility to be able to distribute the funds more evenly across the state, whereas before some NRDs possibly might have been ranking different and might not have had as good of a chance to get state funds, so to speak. So the categories really just adds a little more flexibility for us to distribute the funds more evenly across the state and kind of see how we can get funds allocated more evenly. If there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't know that I did the greatest job this morning of explaining it, but I guess the main message is we did set it up that way this year. Just to get the funds more evenly distributed across the state and make it more NRD specific with how those were being ranked. And then the last bullet there, I just did a quick analysis of 2021 WIN applications / contracts. There is no easy way yet within CART to be able to tell by practice, by ranking pool, what practices are being funded. So these top 3 practices that I have here in this 5th bullet, those are just, I guess, current data as of right now that consists only of contracts that have been obligated and are actually in a contract. If they aren't contracted or obligated yet, there's no easy way currently within CART for me to be able to tell what practices are all being, I guess, obligated. So I can go back and look at prior years because those have been obligated and anything that's currently obligated. So this was just a quick breakdown of the top 3 practices. So that consists of brush management, prescribed grazing, and prescribed burning.
Connor, this is Rich Nelson. Off the top of your head, obviously there were no contracts in 5 NRDs or no applications funded in 5 NRDs. You have any idea what those were? And I'm not trying to call them out. I'm just, as we get to the end of our meeting and our discussion about how to market more applications, I'm just curious if you know what those are.
I could go and look, Rich. If you gave me a couple minutes, we could come back to that.
Yeah, and I think it's more pertinent to our discussion later this morning anyway, so.
Sure, and yeah, I'll go take a look at that. Keep in mind, those 5 NRDs could have had an application that consisted of those 114 from the get-go, but maybe they were funded elsewhere. So therefore, once it's taken out of a submitted status at CART, there's no way for me to tell if there was an application for that. I know that kind of sounds odd, but keep that in mind. I will try and go back and see if any of those five actually did have an application at one point. So other than that, Eric, for the WIN, that's what I had for an update.
Okay, I'll let people kind of think about some questions, but I'm going to make a comment here, and it kind of goes to what Rich was saying, not trying to call out NRDs, and so I think it deserves some distinction that these the NRDs make up the local working groups, which I think a lot of people know, and the NRDs may not have a lot of direct involvement in EQIP projects. I mean, it's mostly those NRCS offices within the local work group area, which is set up by NRDs. And so, it's just a way to measure kind of where those projects are happening. And so I just want to make that kind of clearer, I guess, because it can be confusing when we say, well, 5 NRDs didn't have a project. Well, that's basically that local work group for whatever reason. Connor and Rich just mentioned didn't have an application, or an application that just didn't get funded for whatever reason. So just wanted to make that distinction. And then I guess I'll open it up for any questions from folks on the call.
Hey, Eric and Connor, this is Matt Smith with Ply Lakes Joint Venture.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, I was curious. I'm assuming that you've identified some high priority practices in your EQIP program that are offered at the higher payment rates. And if so, do you get a sense that those high priority practices are being used more in your applications, or do you see any connection with the applications and those practices?
Eric, do you want me to address that at least initially?
Sure.
So, Matt, I believe what you're asking about are the 10 practices.
Yes.
That can be utilized. And thank you, Connor, if that's you bringing that up.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's on the ball. So those are the 10 practices that we've selected to receive 90% cost share. And I'll say the philosophy associated with that was a couple of things. One, practices that maybe are slow to be adopted or not being readily adopted for whatever reason, but we really need them on the landscape to solve resource concerns. Another issue was expensive practices. Wetland restoration would fall into probably both of those categories. And then a third would be some practices, again, that we really need on the landscape, but not providing as much of an so-called economic return. If we do prescribed grazing systems, well, theoretically, or irrigation water management or something, there may be some economic gain from that, as opposed to some of our buffer practices where we're taking land out of production. And I'll just finish by saying, and then I'll open it back up for Connor or Eric, or whoever else wants to comment. I mean, I think what we offer here for those high priority possibly influences the adoption of some of those, and prescribed burning might be the most notorious in wind, because I think historically we've always had relatively low rates. We've tried to strive to increase those rates through our payment system methodology with limited success to be able to get those increased. Anything else you guys want to add? Go ahead.
Connor, I think I'm going to have to defer to you if you have any more insight as to if we're getting more usage of those. I guess from your little summary there, I was glad to see prescribed burning was kind of up there, I guess, because that's a practice we definitely want to get more of on the ground. And so I'll kind of kick it back to you.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, Rich, thanks for taking that away and kind of explaining the thought process and designating these high priority practices. And you did a good job, I guess, of, when we chose these practices, we also kept in mind that kind of to try and meet our 10% goal as well, we chose some wildlife practices for these as well. But as far as Matt's question, and I guess it's going to take some further analysis by myself or program analysts on our staff to kind of see, I guess, the difference in, now that we have the ability to designate up to 10 high priority practices, up to 90% cost share rates. I haven't looked into if there's been an increase in actually getting these practices contracted as opposed to prior to the ability to designate high priority practices. But that's a good question. So something I'll document and try and I guess get analysis maybe thrown together at some point to see if there's been a difference in getting those practices contracted. I think that's after Matt.
Yeah, exactly. That's very helpful. Thanks. Is that pretty hard to do with the way CARD is structured, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it kind of is. The reporting aspects of CART aren't fully built out yet.
Okay.
We utilize ProTrax as well. That's more of the funds manager part of contracting, and there are some reports within there that I think I could get that data from and kind of throw together some type of analysis, but it is still kind of difficult, I'll admit. But that would be something good to try and gather.
All right. Thank you.
Connor or Rich, could you, there was a question in the chat, and I would do a poor job of probably explaining it, but could you explain access control a little bit?
Sure. Access control is a conservation practice. Previous, if you go back 5 or 10 years, it was called use exclusion, name changed, same practice. Where it's being used primarily is in resting, grazing land, and that might be for a variety of reasons. Probably the most notable would be a rest that's required to build up fine fuels so that we can conduct a prescribed burn in a following year. But we've used it in past years, following the 2012 drought, we paid some access control for some rest on pastures to try to do some drought recovery. We might pay for it on a site where we have done some interseeding, for example, and want that to become more established before that grazing event takes place. So it's really excluding use, and mostly a haying or a grazing use.
Thanks, Rich. We just an aside, we also use it in our cover crop RCPP in the southwest part of the state, because we do allow some grazing on those cover crops, but we use this to provide a little bit more incentive to one, put cover crops in, but also to provide them a little more incentive to leave a certain percentage for wildlife if they are going to choose to graze. So just another way it's kind of used as an example.
And Connor, I should probably qualify what I just said, because I think we're actually deferring grazing prior to a prescribed burn now using 528 prescribed grazing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So I don't want to mislead people too much there. And I apologize for that error, but that pendulum's kind of swung back and forth. We pay for it this way, and then somebody decides the rules need to change. And so that's changed over the years.
Rich, the reason that changed was because the life expectancy of access control changed nationally.
Yep. The practice lifespan changed, and sometimes so like if you put in a fence, for example, theoretically the last 10 years or whatever that lifespan is. I don't have those memorized, but thanks, Mary. Good point.
Yeah, so access control is actually a 10-year lifespan now. So that's kind of why we had to revert back to utilizing 528 deferments to get subsequent years of grazing deferments.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Hearing none, I think we will move on to the second agenda item, which is Ryan Lodge's update on the Eastern Sandhills Working Lands for Wildlife.
Thanks, Eric. All right. Here, so got a couple of things I wanted to share with everybody. I only have one thing to show, but before I show a map, I want to just go over some numbers with you, and if you guys want me to send something to you, I can. But Working Lands for Wildlife REQIP, I think most of you on this call are familiar with it. It started back in 2017, and it's been very successful to date. And I just want to give you guys a breakdown where we have been at since 2017. So we started in 2017, we had 9 projects for almost 9,200 acres. 2018, we did 12 projects for 12,500 acres. And I'm using round numbers here. 2019, we had 12 projects for 8,700 acres. And then last year, we had 11 projects for 13,800 acres. And then right now, we're currently going in 2021, we're going through and obtaining agreements and getting equips obligated. We have 12 projects for 17,800 acres. So since inception, we're right at 56 projects for 62,000 acres. And this isn't just equip Working Lands by itself. We're able to impact so many projects and acres because of all the partners that are financially contributing to this. So like Fish and Wildlife Service, Game and Parks, the Sandhills Task Force, Pheasants Forever, those sorts of folks are helping making our dollars go. further with the allocation that we received through EQIP. So it's been hugely successful. And then I just wanted to share with you guys more of a comprehensive map. Yes, Eric or somebody let me know when you guys can see this.
We can see it. If you could blow it up just a little bit, that might help a little bit. There, perfect.
Okay. A little blurry, so you might not see this, but this is a map it's more of a comprehensive map that doesn't show only, it shows not only the working lands for wildlife EQIP projects, but also the projects where partners are involved as well. So it's both partners and EQIP, and it's since fiscal year 16 through today. And these projects are all a combination of brush management primarily, but we also do quite a bit with grazing management and prescribed fire. But today we have over 105,000 acres of projects. And I like to show this map because we're starting to build some core areas. It's just not kind of really a shotgun approach. We start in one area and we have landowners that, are really supportive of this and help us promote this program. And you can see in areas of Wheeler, Garfield, even in the Loop in Rock County, that we're starting to build some nice complexes and some cores. And even within these cores that we're working on, some of these areas are cedar tree free. So we may never, completely fill those areas in. For example, between that complex between Garfield and Wheeler County, there's some areas there that are pretty good. But the point is that the landowner support has been huge. We have good buy-in and the culture's there. And we're starting to get more of a fire culture with TNC, with that position, helping Chad Plato help with landowners in this area getting more fire. We're starting to come back to these areas where we cleared trees 3-4 years ago and implementing fire on these projects. So we have a lot of good momentum. We are already getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of inquiries to start looking at projects for this calendar year already. So any questions or comments on any of that? That's all I really had.
Okay. Ryan, I do want to hit on a point you touched on, and you may want to make it just a little smaller so we can see that legend. Well, I guess we can't probably read the legend. Maybe just just go over that.
So the legends and the stuff that's like just as I have no color, the black outlines, those are projects where it was just EQIP, Working Lands for Wildlife, where partners weren't involved. The blue colored ones are, I can't read that. I think those are just the current 2021 projects that we have going on. And then the other ones are a combination of partners and Working Lands for Wildlife projects that we have going on.
All right, perfect. And I guess I just want to touch on something that will kind of lead us into the next topic. But as Ryan mentioned, we are starting to see some pretty cool complexes on that map, and I think maybe the next an effort that will be coming up this year is to work with Dylan Fogarty at UNL, who's in Direct Twidwell's lab, and try to identify areas within kind of the project area that lend to larger cores and larger complexes, because I think that will tell the whole story. This tells some of the story. It tells all the great stuff that's been going on with the partners, and it's all great work. But if we could show that some of these areas have landscapes that surround them that are cedar free, or that the landowners may be taking care of themselves, I think that will show a even more just a better story, and more of how they're getting at kind of that landscape scale with this project, which would be awesome. So Dylan, Ryan, and I have already kind of shared some emails, but I think that's, like I said, some of the next steps in showing what the full impacts are that are being made. So it's, I think, a pretty exciting thing. So are there any other questions for Ryan? Okay, I don't see any in the chat. So again, this kind of leads us right into sort of a newer effort that has kind of been rolled out a little bit late last summer, and then there's been several things going on in the meantime, and that pertains to the Great Plains Grassland Framework, which is something that Dylan is going to kind of lay out for us if folks haven't heard about it. And then Rich is going to tell us a little bit more about how the Great Plains Grassland Framework fits into the Great Plains Grassland Initiative. And then, you know, we'll discuss kind of, you know, how are we going to move forward with this, what this means for Nebraska, and we'll go from there. So I see, Dylan, you've got your PowerPoint there pulled up. That looks perfect. Yep. So I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for inviting me. Can everybody hear me? Just to make sure.
Yes, yes,
right.
We can. Loud and clear.
So I'm the new coordinator for Working Lands Conservation with the university. This is a position funded by the Environmental Trust, and I'll work directly under Drac Twidwell with this position, who's actually the USDA science advisor and on the science team for Working Lands for Wildlife. This position was actually funded last year, but with how crazy last year was with everything going on, I was just hired officially in May this year. So it's a lot's happened over the year with as far as frameworks and new science for managing woody encroachment. And what this position really serves to do is improve the performance of conservation investments for eastern red cedar invasion. Really, this coordinator position is to support partnerships to launch a full-fledged defensive strategy for defending our most intact grasslands in Nebraska. This framework follows a co-production approach to science partnerships. Shown here, I'm going to talk about 4 things that are specific to my new position, but really none of them are mutually exclusive. They're all integrated. Co-production approaches start with a shared vision. They're collaborative and partnership driven. They take a strategic and targeted approach to management. They focus on outcomes and achieving those outcomes, and it's process driven. So it's not, we don't drop off products and say, see you later. We're there for adaptation, to see strategies through. And really it's a partnership driven process. So what I want to do today is walk through each of these items, and how they relate to new frameworks. So I'll go over my new roles as coordinator, coordinating the use of new science products for conservation planning, growing and supporting collaborative partnerships, coordinating the co-production of integrated management plans, and tracking management outcomes. Starting with new science products, like I said, there's a lot of new frameworks, initiatives, and science out there for managing this problem. We've got the Great Plains Grassland Biome Framework, the first framework for biome conservation in the Great Plains. Provides a vision for how we can conserve grasslands. This vision's really, it takes a strategic approach that's rancher driven, science informed, and agency supported. As coordinator, what my role will do, it'll help bridge these circles. Really, I'll be helping to kind of bring things together, and streamline coordination, building capacity for these science partnerships. In terms of new science products and being there for tech transfer, Drac and I have developed a guide for reducing risk and vulnerability to woody encroachment in rangelands. This is available right now in preprint it's going to be available in print with multi-state extension this summer. This guide provides the science and rationale behind these new initiatives and frameworks for tackling woody encroachment in the Great Plains. So we have the guide. Can everybody see my screen as I kind of float around?
Yep,
Okay.
We can see it.
So this is I just want to quick, cover some of these products and where we think they fit in. This is a guide we developed. It's about 40 pages. Goes through the ecology of woody encroachment, the problems of scale, frameworks for managing risk and vulnerability, integrated management for reducing risk and vulnerability, and then putting together a spatial game plan. This guide really provides a much more detailed foundation for some of the strategies listed in the Great Plains Biome Framework. This guide is not a standalone tool, but provides a framework on how we can work together and some of the strategies we can pursue. It goes through a lot of how we can implement these new strategies, the science behind woody encroachment. We've looked at seed dispersal, and we have a lot of new science to show how we can better implement strategies at the landscape scale. We've got the Rangeland analysis platform, which is continually coming out with new tools and new data every year. A couple years ago, we started using the screening tool as a large-scale conservation planning tool, and now that's on the Rangeland analysis platform, can be used. With my position, we want to assist in using these products. We have treeless layer. Each of these products helps us kind of set the context and scale for more strategic management plans. All right, let me jump back here. Growing and supporting collaborative partnerships. Really, this is the heart of everything, is being able to support and grow these partnerships. The new biome framework looks to work. Yep.
Dylan, at least on my screen, I see your video, but not the slide you're showing for some reason.
Okay, let me.
I don't know if that's the same for everybody.
I'm able to see it, Dylan, but.
Let me just reshare.
Yep.
Yeah, I was seeing your slide as well. I can see it.
Okay, maybe it's just me.
Well, let's see if we can get you better control. How's that, Eric?
I can see your desktop now.
Okay.
Cool, thanks.
All right. Anyway, the framework looks to work where we have intact landscape cores, wildlife strongholds, and cultural will. We want to help identify these areas. We've worked with a bunch of groups across the state. We've got a good idea of what makes these partnerships work. With this new position, we can do that more. We can build those partnerships, especially as COVID restrictions wind down and we can get out of our kitchens and offices a little bit more. We've talked about this as guardians of the grasslands. We want to partner with the groups that are ready to conserve Nebraska's natural heritage, our grassland heritage. The grassland biome is collapsing. Nebraska has some of the world's most intact grasslands. We want to work with people that are passionate about conserving those grasslands. So we have co-production of integrated management plans. We'll probably talk more about today. But these new frameworks take a fundamentally different approach to working lands conservation. Instead of working in the red and chasing the problem, these new strategies focus on our intact cores, or our best grassland sites, and then defending them by using them as anchors and then working into the problem and growing our grassland cores. So it kind of flips the traditional model. If we're going to do this, it's going to require an integrated management plan. New approaches, they use the ecology of encroachment as a blueprint for more strategic management plans. Okay, so if we think about the encroachment process across the landscape, we have intact grasslands. Those are treeless areas without incoming seeds. We have the dispersal stage, where we have treeless grasslands with incoming seed. We have grasslands in some of the earliest stages of active encroachment, where we have seedlings and sapling trees, but we don't yet have seed production. We have the expansion or the encroachment zone, where we have active seed production and a seed source in our dispersal zones. And then we have woodland transition zone, where we're seeing the most severe consequences of woody encroachment. When we talk about defending cores and growing cores, what that comes down to is understanding where these different stages exist on a landscape, and then leveraging that information to kind of deconstruct the woody encroachment process and push back against it. Like Eric talked about, with this approach, we want to be able to show not only where we've worked, but we want to be able to show where, a 10-acre project helped protect 100 acres, or where a 1,000-acre project helped conserve 10,000 acres. And we can do that by accounting for where these stages exist on the landscape. If it's a small project, if it's a really expensive project, those have been criticisms of brush management in the past. But with this new approach, if we can show where a small project benefited a huge area, that's going to be critical to showing success and defending our grasslands. Anyway, so we want to work with groups to build these strategies. We've already done that with Scott Wessel's group with Game and Parks in the Northeast Nebraska and the Verdigris Brazil BUL area. And this has taken many shapes. We can help develop a strategy through Zoom meetings, through in-person meetings. When that becomes available, we've done this in a shop with landowners. And we've also worked with the U.S. Forest Service, kind of showing their strategy and conceptualizing how they could grow a grassland core around one of the biggest seed sources in the state. And then this is, process driven and outcome focused. So we want to help you track outcomes. We want to be able to show where new approaches have stabilized grassland resources, where we've halted regime shifts or reversed a regime shift. We want to show where we've benefited threatened and endangered species, where we've boosted rangeland productivity, or more importantly, where we've avoided the loss of rangeland productivity. There's new tools coming out that actually can track yield gap in rangelands. So what that does is it looks at our current productivity levels compared to where they would be in 1990 without woody encroachment. And so what we're seeing is massive yield gaps in our grasslands. With new technology available, we're going to be able to track where we've closed those yield gaps and where we've prevented them from happening in the first place. Additionally, we want to show where management has helped reduce the hazard of wildfire. Trees, cedar in particular, poses a much greater wildfire risk compared to our grasslands, and we want to help you all quantify those outcomes to support some of the good work that's going on. That's a little bit about my new role and how it relates to these new frameworks. Don't hesitate to contact me. We're happy to work with new folks and keep growing our existing partnerships. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Dylan. That's some pretty exciting stuff. It'll be awesome to see kind of how this blossoms and flourishes. I think it's going to help us be more strategic and you know, spend dollars more wisely. You know, just a lot of different things. So I appreciate that overview. Does anybody have any questions for Dylan about the framework or the other documents he was showing? All right, not a very talkative crowd this morning. My gosh, this is good stuff. We need to be rolling around in our collective heads how we're going to put this on the landscape and use this stuff. So don't be shy. But I guess if there are no questions, I'll move on to Rich, and Rich can kind of give us more of an overview of how we might use these tools to implement a new initiative here in the state.
Okay, thanks, Eric. And just let me know if I ever get my screen pulled up that I can share.
We can see it.
I'm only going to show you that so that you don't have to look at me while I talk. And Dylan did a great job of providing an overview. And so all I'm going to do is fill in, you know, 3 or 4 things that we are doing in the meantime correlated to the Great Plains Initiative. The Great Plains Initiative is an effort that NRCS is undertaking along with a number of partners under the Working Lands for Wildlife umbrella. And of course, it exists throughout the Great Plains, just like this region you see here. And it's also really an expansion of the lesser prairie chicken effort that has occurred over the last several years in the southern, 4 to 5 states there from Kansas, Colorado, south. But to take those same concepts and focus on the biome, as Ellen was talking about, and to look really at, first and foremost, at least in Nebraska's case, woodland expansion and with emphasis on eastern red cedar there. Also looking at annual grass invasion and the conversion of cropland from grasslands to cropland. So not the conversion of cropland, but the conversion to cropland. So working with Dirac and Dylan now, we hope to work more strategically. We're spending a lot of effort and funds on things like brush management, prescribed burning, but we want to be more targeted and more effective in that. Our goal is to have some things in place, some information, some communication with partners, so that starting in fiscal year 22, which will be this October, we're sort of ready to roll out with a little different strategy at how we're doing some of our woody expansion control efforts. And so just to give you a few ideas of what some of those things are, a lot of the partners and the landowners have already been pretty collaborative, and we're continuing to build upon that and reach out to producer groups like Cattlemen and Nebraska Sandhills Task Force and things like that to make sure we're on board with what they're interested in and the mechanism they want to use to build those core areas like Dylan was talking about. We've also been leaning on Dirac and Dylan to provide us some geospatial information that will allow us to prioritize and focus some of those efforts more than we've done in the past. Where are the core areas? Where's that expansion? And also, which tools are we going to use in those areas? As he pointed out in that Science of Change document, in some cases where we're on that leading edge, we can take pretty simple steps to be effective. We don't have seed production yet, et cetera. And in other cases, we need to be much more aggressive and doing probably both mechanical removal and fire in order to be effective long-term at suppressing that woody invasion. So that's another thing that's happening. I anticipate, I can't guarantee it because it's outside of my realm, but I anticipate that we will go out to the local work groups with some discussion topics. Because the thing I want to mention about the Great Plains Initiative is, I think first and foremost, myself included, the first thing is like, okay, well, where's the money for this new initiative? That's probably sort of how we're all trained up to look at things. And there may be some funding opportunities that address this. There may be opportunities for our CPP applications to focus in on a given portion of the state and try to target core areas there. But I think what our goal here is to really change the way we operate, no matter how and where the money comes from. And that includes probably partners as well. Not that we're going to dictate to partners how to spend their funds, but how can we be more efficient and effective, whether we're using EquipWin or a new RCPP, or whether the feds give Nebraska a larger allocation related specifically to the Great Plains Initiative, or whether I'm working within my local work group and the fund pool associated with that, and on and on. And so that's really what we're trying to structure ourselves to do here over the next couple, 3 months, so that we can have the tools in place to hit the ground running for this next fiscal year. And so with that, I think that's adequate in the interest of time and wanting more discussion. But Dylan did a great job of really addressing what we're after here holistically, not only in Nebraska, but throughout the Great Plains.
Okay, well, thanks, Rich. I'd open it up for some discussion at this point, just to see if there's any questions or comments, or I guess anything that anybody has. Ed, I see your hand is up. Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not going to turn my video on. I don't have great internet this morning, but Ed Hubbs with Audubon, Nebraska at Spring Creek Prairie, just outside of Lincoln. Dylan, maybe this question's for you, but anybody who knows the answer. Looking at that, the technology and the maps and stuff that you were showing, what is the scale? I'm thinking more like small scale, particularly in the eastern part of the state, where we're maybe smaller land holdings for individual landowners. What's the scale when you're looking at some of that woody invasion? One, what are you using? What are you looking at scale wise? And what can you look at? Like, is a 20, 40 acre piece too small, or are you looking regionally?
Yeah, good question. So those broad scale tools, those are broad scale tools that I showed online. Really, they show you what's happening all around you regionally. It does get finer resolution as you zoom in, but they're not meant to be used in acre parcels. Really, if you're managing a property, you know what's going on that property better than what the remote sensing information is going to tell you. What the remote sensing is going to tell you is where your context within a broader scale. With these new strategies, we're looking to scale up conservation, whatever that is. That's going to be different in different parts of the state. When we're working in the red or the eastern part of the state, the cores are going to start smaller, but the idea is to make conservation spatially contagious, like the encroachment process, and develop these core areas. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I just like maybe a little bit clarification, like on a county scale. That's how I'm taking this. Like on a county scale, this would be a good thing maybe, but on a, smaller than that scale, maybe not.
Yeah, and smaller than a county. I mean, if you look at like what's going on in the Les Canyons as a biologically unique landscape, it shows very clearly what's going on within that region, which is smaller than a county. It shows even 1,000-acre burn units. It's showing a response to those. So, if you're talking large management units, yeah, you're going to see an outcome. But if you're going to be using that to really with the screening and those remote sensing products can detect as mature trees. if you're, and the big emphasis here is to manage earlier. And so we still want to be managing the areas that these remote sensing products aren't going to be picking up. If you're spending all your dollars in an area that we talk about as tree free on the remote sensing platform or the low tree cover, that's a good sign, because it's missing all those small trees. It's missing the seeds. It's missing the seedlings. And so what we'd recommend is you use your remote sensing products to get you so far, and then from that part you have to hone in with field inventory and these distance-based measures. So we now know we did a seed dispersal study in the sandhills, so we have a good idea of how far recruitment's occurring from our seed sources. So with that information, we can develop on the ground strategies that are much more detailed than what's allowed with remote sensing alone. But I think with this position, one of the things we need to do is start to develop a framework for integrating those remote sensing products with on the ground field inventory as we develop these plans. Is that more of what you're looking for, Ed?
And I might build upon that a little as well, Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Ed, if you were going to comment back.
No, I was just going to say thanks. That makes sense. I missed the part about how it picks up mostly mature trees. Does that also correlate with shrubs like dogwood and sumac, with them being not as big as maybe a mature tree? Will it pick that kind of woody encroachment up as well?
I can't say, to be honest. We haven't ground truthed the shrub layer very well, or I haven't done much work ground truthing the shrub layer in Nebraska, and so I don't know, what its accuracy is. I would say explore it at a site, and that should give you a pretty good idea of what it's getting and what it's missing. But and I don't want to underestimate these products. They've really helped advance the way we do conservation, and how the level at which we can plan strategically at large scales. But a cedar tree can start producing seeds when it's about 5 feet tall, and it's just really tough to consistently pick up those trees from space.
I'll make a quick comment, and then I see Andy has his hand up because he's going to say the same thing I am. But there's also two things going on that are kind of parallel here. The work that Dylan and Dirac and others are doing with, I think, Dylan primarily the WRAP tool, and using its software capability. And then Andy has worked, Andy Bishop with the joint venture has also worked extensively with some of our partners using the Rabbit tool, and are in a process of trying to do some ground truthing assessments to make a tool, if you will, that gets more at what you're asking about, Ed, which is if I wanted to do planning on my 5,000 acre ranch or whatever, and look at densities and so forth, trying to make that tool more accurate to be used for that purpose and at that scale. So I think the two complement each other really well. I'll stop there and see if Andy has anything else he wants to share.
No, Rich, I appreciate that introduction. And Dylan, I think, WRAP has got a phenomenal track record of helping us really plan and identify at that, watershed, eco-regional level of where do we have the problem, where do we have the invasion, where do we have the opportunity for protection, if you can say that, for protection of invasion or maintenance of the core. And I think, what Rabbit is going to help us do is, really kind of help refine the contract development. It's a much more finer scale. We're using 10 centimeter imagery to help train the tool, so you can actually pick out individual trees. And that's getting us down to that canopy cover level, that's associated with the practice payment scenario. But, it's a bulldog to, try to map at that scale. And that's why we're doing it MLRA at a time. But we should have the sandhills, the central Lust Hills, and then what's called the rolling plains and breaks, which goes into Kansas, but includes the Lust Canyons. we should have this tool developed for that area. But I mean, they're complementary. I mean, it's scale dependent. Are we trying to plan for what are we going to do today, tomorrow, and in 30 years? Or are we trying to plan for the contract? And I think, it's really exciting that we're building and leveraging off of the different data sets to really put Nebraska in a place where we know where we're going and what we need to do. And it's pretty scary. Just as an example from the Rainwater Basin Joint Venture Landbird Plan, what we're going to have to do to try to control eastern red cedar in the mixed grass prairie region of Nebraska is about, $4 million if we're just trying to keep, as tracts of grass get into 5% canopy cover, or if we're, trying to maintain these grasslands where you start to see a 1% canopy cover, it's $20 million a year of mechanical and prescribed fire treatments. So we got a lot of work to do, and I think it's really cool that we've got all the tools that Drock and Dylan have brought to us to help focus where we go in the future. So thanks for the opportunity just to chime in from the bird dork perspective.
All right. Thanks, Andy. I won't call you bird dork, but there was a question about, are the mapping tools available online? And I had put in rangelands.app. Is that correct, Dylan, as far as you know, for the RAP tool? And then Andy, I guess, is the rabbit or Rich, is the rabbit tool available, or is that still?
Well, rabbit's available. What Andy's talking about, which is some ground truth, and I'll do some searching here when we move on to the next topic to see if I can find a link that I can put in the chat, or if somebody else beats me to it, great, I'll buy you a Coke. But yes, rabbit's available. And then what Andy's referring to is going to be a more refined version on an MLRA basis or a regional basis as we get the data uploaded.
So just to follow up with that, we should have the Sandhills available by July, and then the Central Les Hills and Les Canyons portion, which also includes the Republican River drainage, should be available by later this fall.
Perfect.
And yeah, Eric, that's the link. That's correct.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Any other questions about what we've been talking about?
Quick question for Dylan. Is the scope of your work, is that just for Nebraska, or are you working throughout the whole Great Plains Grassland Initiative area?
It's Nebraska. We'll be embedded with the Working Lands for Wildlife team, Western Working Lands for Wildlife team. But my efforts will be focused here in Nebraska.
Okay, thanks.
And then I'll just add to that, Dylan, that the arrangement that NRCS has with DRAC is to also provide technical science support for a 4-state region: Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. But we're going to make sure Dylan never leaves the state. But that's a joke. We'll let you leave. Once COVID's fully over, Dylan, we'll let you leave. But,
sounds good.
But anyway, just to clarify for the discussion, and of course, all of them are working within that Western Working Lands framework and that group, which includes other science advisors and so forth.
Okay, any other questions? All right, so not moving totally away from the Working Lands for Wildlife topic, and Rich, you can chime in if you would like to, but just wanted to throw out yet another initiative that we're really just sticking our toe in the water on, is a northern bobwhite quail initiative that is originally started in the southeast part of the United States and has been, I think, ongoing for probably about 5 years now. They've had some really good success, and in this last year there's been an effort to expand that to other states that are interested. And for a variety of reasons, like I said, we're more sticking our toe in the water with this initiative because this last year there's been a lot happening, regarding this other Great Plains Grassland initiative, and so it was kind of hard for us to plan and see how that those two might overlap or work together. Plus, we already have a Working Lands for Wildlife project ongoing, and so I just wanted to mention that we do have we are a part of that. We're supporting the Bobwhite Working Lands for Wildlife, but at this point, our effort and goals related to that are going to be somewhat minimal until we can, I guess, identify more of a or put more of a priority on that. Like I said, there's a lot going on, and we're just kind of in a holding pattern with that right now. But if things do change and we decide to put more emphasis on quail and those focal areas, we will definitely let the group know. Rich, is there anything you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add, Eric, is that there was previously a bobwhite quail Working Lands for Wildlife that was very much focused farther south and east in the southeast United States. And they kind of opened up this invitation for other states to join if they chose to. And to be honest, we kind of struggled with that, but we didn't want to be left out in the cold if future opportunities, it's kind of like when the bus comes by the station, you don't know whether to get on or not, but if you don't get on, the bus is gone. Not that necessarily would happen, but we do see some opportunities for us to maybe gain from that partnership to some extent. So we're sort of playing along and probably using, we know we're already using some wind dollars in areas that have a benefit or a focus on quail in the state. So it's just kind of a shell game partnership thing that we're sorting through.
All right, yeah, and if you do end up getting on that bus, you kind of want to know where you're going and where you want to get off, or at least that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We might have a leg on the bus and we want to be involved, but we're just not sure exactly how it fits into all these other initiatives going on. So I appreciate that, Rich. I see a question in the chat from George. Right now, it's focused in the southeast part of the state, but like I said, we don't have a lot of goals associated with it. It's more of a placeholder to potentially do something into the future and go from there. So the focus area could in fact change, but yes, most of the initial planning has been kind of in the southeast core of our of the state and southeast portion, because that's kind of our core quail range, although it does reach out into those south central counties and even the southwest and other places in the state. We have good populations of quail, but that would be what I would call our core. So hopefully that answers your question, George. Any questions about the Quail Working Lands for Wildlife initiative? Okay, well, appreciate the discussion on Working Lands for Wildlife as a whole. That's a big initiative, and I think we'll have a lot of opportunities to get some good work done. So with that, we'll move on to the final agenda item, and this is going to kind of go back to where we started with the WIN fund pool discussion, and I will go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so hopefully you all can see that. Rich or Connor, can you see that?
Looks good, Eric.
Yep, I got it.
Okay, perfect. So kind of to set this up a little bit, so last year, as Connor kind of mentioned, each local work group was given an allocation under the WIN fund pool. Prior to that, we had ranked projects statewide, and you know, there were areas where it was heavily used, where WIN was heavily used. There were areas where it was not used much at all. And so, you know, in an effort to kind of get some more interest in the WIN initiative, NRCS made the decision to allocate some funds to each of those local work groups, which overall I think is a great thing. It gets some skin in the game, I guess, so to speak, for those folks, and you know, shows them that there's some funding there to use. And you know, one thing I'd like to point out is how I look at this is, you know, if there's a project in EQIP general, and it can be fit with a wildlife focus into the WIN, then that's a win, a actual win for that office or that local work group, because it takes some pressure off of those oversubscribed general EQIP funds that you know, that we normally have way too much interest for and not enough funding. And so it can help take some of that strain off those general EQIP funds if you are able to you know, determine that the project is in fact wildlife friendly. So there are, as Connor mentioned, there are 17 practices that NRCS has sort of you know, identified as being core wildlife practices, and those are listed here in this document. And what this document is meant to do is just kind of describe more in depth what the WIN initiative is, what projects we're looking to implement via the wildlife initiative funding, and how we would like to see it kind of distributed on the landscape. And what I mean by that is we have our Nebraska Natural Legacy Project, which is our state wildlife action plan, and we have 40 biologically unique landscapes in there. And so the ranking identifies if a project is meeting you know, some sort of need for a species in need of conservation, whether it be threatened and endangered, or we use the term tier 1, tier 2 species in our legacy project. And so you know, we're again trying to focus this to make or to get the most benefit. We also added a focus for our Burger and Pheasant plan. So we have I believe 8 pheasant opportunity areas within that plan. And so if we're putting an upland wildlife cover on the ground, then that could get additional points. And so that's kind of how we're focusing the wildlife initiative, and so that's kind of described here. This was sent out originally last late summer for NRCS offices and other partners to kind of get everybody on the same page, like I mentioned, to describe more what we were looking for in the wildlife fund pool. And I think it was a great step forward, but we identified some needs and some questions that arose during this last ranking and application period. So what we tried to do was kind of clarify a little bit about biologist involvement. These projects do require a biologist to be involved in the planning portion of the EQIP application. And so, you know, those sorts of things, the planning worksheets that we do for wildlife, you know, they need to be conducted or completed, you know, ideally early on in the process before ranking, and because of the timing of how EQIP applications are taken in November and then ranked sometime in February, March, it doesn't always lend to getting out into the field and being able to look at those habitats and see what kind of shape they're in. And so doing it early as you can in the process is recommended, and just something we kind of emphasized in this portion. Again, wildlife biologist is involved in these projects, and so it kind of talks about, gives people guidance on how to work with the wildlife biologist and what sort of things we're looking for. And then something that was added this year, with any large project or large program like EQIP or CRP for that matter, or whatnot, there's always going to be just certain questions that arise. So we wanted to clarify for both NRCS offices and also like partner staff like Farm Bill biologists with Pheasants Forever and other partners on how those should be addressed. And so we added this little statement here at the bottom about, if different questions do arise, the Assistant State Con for Field Operations and the State Wildlife Biologist, being Rich, should be consulted just to kind of hammer out those questions and come to an agreement on that project. So just wanted to point that out.
Eric?
Yep. Go ahead.
Before you move into, and actually this is probably a perfect time because your next comment is going to be about those 17 practices. I just wondered, I could kind of read through what those are because they're just numbers in this document, and there might be people going, well, I don't know what a 422 is.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, I had looked that one up to be sure, but I'll just rattle through those quick. So nationally, those 17 practices that have been identified as, for the most part, providing benefits to wildlife habitat more directly are conservation cover, riparian herbaceous cover, which is when we work on stream systems, riparian forest buffer, stream habitat improvement, aquatic organism passage, which is making sure aquatic species can move up and down stream systems. 420 is a new practice that we're using nationally called wildlife habitat planting. So in more specific cases, like where we're trying to target monarchs, we might use it instead of conservation cover. 422 we don't use in Nebraska. It's a hedgerow planting. And then access control, we talked about that earlier. My brain's hung up on 580. And then I'll come back to 580. Restoration and management of declining habitats. And then there's both wetland and upland wildlife habitat management, shallow water habitat management, early successional habitat management, and then those last three there, 657, 658, and 659 are wetland restoration, creation, and enhancement. So just to give you an idea of what those practices are.
Hey, Rich, 580 is stream bank and shoreline.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Connor. So I got about a 92% on my quiz.
You did pretty good.
Awesome.
All right, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, so again, there's some other practices listed there. I don't know them as well as Rich, so I would get a 30% probably if I tried to go through those. But I think which one? 338 prescribed fire.
Yeah, so that'd be brush management, prescribed fire. 382 is fence. 393 is filter strips. 528 is grazing. 612 is tree and shrub planting. 666 is forest stand improvement. So some things that, often provide benefits, especially the way we use them in Nebraska. And that's one thing, nationally, that sometimes practices are used slightly different. 666 in a forest state might be used completely differently than it is in Nebraska.
Yeah, and I guess just wanted to point out that if you were listening while Rich was rattling off those names so astutely, and remember back to what Connor showed as our top 3 practices: prescribed fire, prescribed grazing, and brush management. Those aren't on the 17 practice list, and so that's why it's been so important to be able to, I guess, be flexible with those practices, because otherwise there's no way that we would meet our 10% goal in Nebraska. And so I appreciate NRCS, identifying that and understanding that we need to use other practices than those 17 that are identified, because I know there are places where they strictly use those 17 to count, and so that gives us a lot of help as far as doing some great wildlife projects across the landscape. So any questions quickly about those practices right offhand? Okay, so from here we're going to move into kind of more of the, I guess, what you would call the screening tool. And I've left some comments up here as kind of discussion items. One thing we identified is not everyone, there's lots of NRCS offices, lots of staff from partners across the state, as far as trying to determine what are the high priority practices that we want to see. And of course, we just talked about those 17 practices that are listed above. I also added a comment here, or just a note that there are 4 of those practices that receive higher payment rates, so that folks understand that when they're talking to a producer. The next one that we've listed as kind of a high priority is, of course, 338 prescribed burning, and I'm going to kind of skip my comment there for now, and then we'll come back to it. But we've also identified, of course, we just talked about working lands for wildlife, and a big part of that is using 314 brush management, especially those low infestation areas that can really make a difference in a landscape from a scale, and they're cheaper to implement. And so those have become kind of what I would call our priority as far as within the brush management. But the other brush management scenarios are also very high priority. If we're using those 2 practices in combination, that's of course going to be a very high priority project for us. Getting those trees cut and then following up with a fire is pretty crucial in many parts of the state, so that we can keep those seedlings that eventually will come in after that treatment. So we've also included 657 Wetland Restoration. That's I think mostly where pit fills are put under, and then just your normal wetland restoration. We do a few of these every year. It seems like they're mostly small scale, but again, it's just something that's a high priority. And then the 666 forest stand improvement practice is also a high priority. Eastern red cedar are moving into our grasslands, but they're also taking or have taken hold in our native forest lands. And so if we can do forest stand improvement and make those forests function as they should be functioning, that's also a high priority for us. So any questions about those high priority practices? I will say that this document is a draft. We're looking for input. The next application period will be this fall. And so now is the time to make these tweaks and get this kind of into a form that we want to share with staff and partners and whatnot. So any questions about those high priority practices that have been listed there on the screen? And I don't know if I can see the chat anymore.
There is a question in the chat, Eric,
Okay.
that I'll address. Andy also has his hand up, so maybe we can take Andy first, and then I'll address the question in the chat.
All right, go ahead, Andy.
Just some quick questions on, I like being able to use your guys' codes. It makes me feel cool, like 657. Any opportunities to improve delivery of that? We've got some small temporaries with concentration pits that I think would, farmers are actually looking to fill the pits and actually try to farm through them again. And Rich, you've been, great about providing insights. And I think Nate just sent some, a schematic out on kind of a flow chart on how do we approach these. What's the best ways to, coming out of COVID, how do we do a better job of kind of educating people about how these restoration practices could be implemented, not just within the EQIP WIN, but also with National Water Quality Initiative funding?
Sure, Andy, I'll touch on that, and I think we're going to maybe want to talk a little more about this also in our open discussion. As we try to seek more applications for this, because as Connor pointed out, we pretty much evened out kind of, pretty close with applications and funding. And in doing so, sometimes you feel like, we maybe funded a project or two that wasn't the best, maybe wasn't a bad project, but we could do better. And so wetland restoration is one of those arenas where I think we can do better using 657. And that could be hydrologic restoration like you described. And it is possible that we could do a project and still allow cropping if the benefit to that system was adequate enough that we showed that the wetland function was improved to the point where, you bet, we got our function back, or we at least improved it, and we can allow periodic cropping as conditions allow. And it's also one of those top 10 practices that did 90% cost share. So I think the door is open for that. And historically, we used to have a 10-year cost share agreement under WRP. That's a long time ago, but I think we've possibly gotten in the habit, if you will, of just not doing a lot of wetland work in the EQIP program because, we got this other program, but that's pretty much strictly an easement program. And so I think the opportunity exists for us to market both stream related projects as well as wetland related projects that we don't do many of now, but that we could potentially spark some interest in. Did that get at what you were asking, Andy?
No, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of people that just don't understand the nuances and the opportunities that are available through, both the WIN and I think the National Water Quality Initiative. So I'm excited for us to continue to promote this. I think the shorebird habitat objectives, the more work we do in the WRP, we've actually reduced shorebird habitat foraging capacity in the rainwater basin by 12% because we're pushing more of our wetlands from farmed wetlands or, temporaries to, more, basically more vegetated wetlands. So sure. I think the 657 could be a really good opportunity for us to make up some of our shorebird objectives. So just looking forward to understanding how we as a partnership can contribute to both the marketing and the delivery of that.
And the other thing that you prompted my head to think of is, 657 does not have to be hydrologic restoration either. We have a lot of wetlands in the state that are hydrologically functioning, but with the invasive species era that we're in these days, we could do some management of invasive plant species as well, whether that's trees, herbaceous, whatever that might be invading a wetland system. I'll go ahead, Eric, and address Chelsea's question in the chat if you'd like me to.
Go right ahead.
So, and Eric's going to touch on this too, and I think we'll get to some more discussion on this topic as well. But Chelsea basically asks, are there restrictions in wind for using things like tree and shrub establishment in a place that might fragment grasslands? And that's a great question, because I've said, especially more recently here, I've said we not only want to do good things with our wind dollars for wildlife, but we darn sure want to make sure we don't do things that might be construed as harmful. And fragmenting grasslands would be one of those things. We've been pretty liberal in leaving things like windbreak establishment and tree and shrub planting in the practice list of what's available. And we've relied historically on that biologist support to help guide that. You know, there are places where possibly even a shelter belt is useful in combination with other practices on a given project. Wouldn't be one of our high priorities, but it may have value. And as we look at some of this prioritization, we will continue to further evaluate that. Where do windbreaks fit, and even tree and shrub planting. What I'll say is the straightforward 612 tree and shrub planting, in my opinion, in the plans that I've seen, has been used pretty judiciously where it belongs, whether it be, you know, shrubs even in that grassland complex or trees where they're appropriate. The one that I think raises greater questions is if and how windbreaks fit into the system. So.
All right, Rich, thank you. Yeah, and I think we'll, like you mentioned, we'll probably get into a little bit more of that here in a bit. I do want to talk about the comment. Hopefully you can all see this. Hopefully it's not too small. If it is, somebody shout out and let me know. But, you know, I guess the way that our biologists look at these projects, you know, we don't look at them as, okay, we're just going to do a burn and we walk away. It's more of a holistic approach. And part of that is to see what in range situations, you know, what the current state of grazing is on that property. We all know that there are properties that look great. We all have seen those properties that look like a tabletop all year long and provide, you know, maybe less than ideal habitat. And so, you know, I think this discussion will even become more important as we potentially get into this Great Plains Grassland Initiative, as we're focusing more in that initiative on, you know, strictly, you know, getting those woody invaders, especially eastern red cedar, off the landscape, and building those cores and getting at a larger scale so that we can slow the encroachment of woody species. We're you know, likely never going to stop it, but in areas where we do have low infestations and less chance for you know, reinfestation, you know, just getting rid of the cedars is the most important resource concern. And so there's, you know, we've had some discussions about, you know, whether we need to be a little less lenient on using or requiring that they meet a prescribed grazing standard when implementing these practices. And, you know, I think in the current Working Lands for Wildlife, Ryan and you know, the folks he works with, they've been looking at that grazing, you know, the existing grazing and what they may want to see in the future. And that's perfectly great, because, you know, there's a lot of partners that have funding going into that, and it works. They're doing some of the best projects out there, I will say. And so, you know, that's something that will likely continue, but I think we need to talk about, you know, if we're in a situation where the biggest threat is a, you know, a patch of eastern red cedar out in the middle of a pasture, and it may not quite meet those habitat goals as far as nesting or whatnot, but those eastern red cedars could really impact it into the future. Is getting those eastern red cedars off the landscape more of a concern than maybe you know, removing a few AUMs from that range in order to bump up some of that cover. So that's just kind of what I wanted to bring up here today. Rich, I don't know if you have more to add to that, but I would welcome any comments that you could provide.
I don't have anything to add now, Eric. I'll just leave it to others to provide some feedback.
Okay. Any comments or questions from folks about, you know, when we look at a project that, you know, maybe it's a project that is strictly burning or is strictly brush management, how important should meeting a prescribed grazing standard be in the wind fund pool specifically?
I guess, Eric, I'm not a delivery person. I'm not on the ground, but I feel like we should probably have a prescribed grazing practice strategy outlined so that we're not having to come back and do the same thing over again. Hopefully we're changing the management of that system or that operation so that we can manage against these invasive species and maximize habitat out there, you know, into the long term. So I might be an oddity. I'm not on the ground. I default to Ryan Lodge and others, but I do think it's important to try to help these guys transition from what got them to where they're at to where we want to all be collectively together.
Yeah, I guess my comment is when we're talking to strictly wind, since it's a limited pot of money and it's a wildlife focused program. Yes, the cedars are a resource concern, but I view it as a symptom of the poor grassland management. And I would like to look at it as from a holistic approach of treating that entire grassland. And that includes what it's going to look like after the trees are gone. If it was mismanaged with trees, it makes me just concerned of how that grassland is going to be treated once the trees are gone. Is there going to be fire that's going to be returned, or are they going to walk away because their trees were taken care of, and that problem will never go away because they got what they needed in the initial treatment. So I view it as more just looking at it holistically and not just from a cedar encroachment standpoint.
This is Scott Wessel, and I think I generally agree with that. You know, the challenge that I see is that 528 is largely focused on livestock production and has done a nice job, I think, with that. I'm not certain that we know enough to make any changes. But in WIN, or Working Lands for Wildlife, with wildlife being a focus, I think we should encourage the investigation into what is proper grazing management for wildlife. You know, we can't do it right now, perhaps, but I think if this is going to be an emphasis, that's something that the science should help us understand a little bit better. One specific thing that I would encourage everybody to look at would be to look at, and maybe we'll get into the ranking tool in a little bit, but look at some of the criteria or the ranking questions about grazing systems. And, you know, most of the scientific evidence says that no grazing system by itself is better than any other one. It's all related to management with stocking rate and so on. And so, you know, in the current ranking tool, season-long grazing gets fewer points than a rotationally grazed system. I don't know that we can say that from a wildlife standpoint or even from a livestock production standpoint that one is better than the other. And that's probably enough.
Any other comments or questions regarding the 528 standard and how it applies to wind projects? Wow, super quiet group today. So, you know, I think we all agree that we would like to see the producers meeting some sort of grazing standard and providing some sort of habitat suitability for wildlife, especially since this is a wildlife fund. But again, I just would, I guess, say that you know, into the future, and we may set up a totally separate screening tool for something like the Great Plains Initiative, but it may just be something that we need to keep in mind as we try to make this easier to implement and easier to understand for those that are you know, talking with producers and whatnot. So I think I will we'll kind of leave it at that unless there's any last questions about that.
Eric, Andy, I think Andy put his hand back up.
Oh, okay.
Just helping you out since you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
You know, just for the group, we did put a Ccga application in on behalf of some of the NRCS staff to actually do some exit interviews with landowners to find out how they perceive the working lands for wildlife contracts that were just brush management versus the ones where it was just a grazing plan. Help them change or modify their operation. So I think we can get some input from the landowners on what their perceptions are, and maybe that'll help us if we do get the grant funded. We'll have a consultant doing some follow-up interviews with landowners so we can get some of their insights into, you know, how they felt it changed their operation or if it didn't change their operation. We'll also be doing some follow-up interviews with producers in the rainwater basin that are grazing wetlands. So it'll be 20 producers that had brush management and a grazing system, you know, type contract. It'll be 20 producers with a grazing system contract, and it'll be 20 producers with ASEP, you know, trying to manage their wetlands through grazing. So hopefully we'll get some input back on, you know, how forage production and grazing operations can mesh with our conservation practices that I think are, you know, pretty directly tied to wind. So just wanted to put that out there so people knew when they saw the results where it kind of came from.
Great. Appreciate it, Andy.
And Eric, I'm going to add just something else just for folks to kind of ponder and chew on a little bit. The first is that sometimes we work with producers using wind dollars to install grazing infrastructure, fences, pipelines, tanks, wells, etc., to accommodate that grazing management system that we're striving for or that we think is more appropriate for the site to meet our prescribed grazing standard. And so, you know, one thing to think about is, you know, how are those funds used? Is that a good way to use the funds? Is it not a good way to use the funds? I'm not going to try to weigh in on that, but I want folks to think about that. And could those same funds that are used for that be used elsewhere? The other thing I'll mention is there is a payment scenario under 528 related to grouse habitat. And it's kind of a management strategy. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've used it much in Nebraska, but it's coming up with a grazing strategy. And maybe Scott kind of alluded to this, where we want a producer to have a wider diversity of use, heavy use, light use, given that maybe most of the landscape is in kind of a moderate use status. So just think about that too. Are there creative ways that we can use some of those incentives within prescribed grazing 528 to maybe get with a producer or two who is willing to do that, and then to follow that up, evaluate what we think the outcome is at. Did it provide any benefits to the species we're targeting?
And just to add a little bit onto that, Rich, anecdotally, I annually look at what projects are and practices within those projects are being funded by WIN, and for those projects on, in a range situation or pasture situation, I would bet that 80+% of the total contract cost is those grazing practices. So fence, water, pipeline, and I'm not saying there's anything bad about that, but just so folks understand, kind of how that funding breaks down. We are doing a lot of grazing infrastructure, and it is costly. So just wanted to, I guess, throw that out there so you can kind of understand how much those practices Rich just mentioned are playing into the WIN fund pool. All right. So we've got about half an hour left, and got a little bit, about half of this document to go. And so Connor, this might be a question for you, but just to set the stage a little bit here about this comment I put in the document. So the funding allocations to each local work group are great because, like I said, it gives them kind of some skin in the game and allows them to use some of this funding that they may not have been able to in the past for whatever reason. And but with anything, there can be drawbacks. And so, I included this, and I don't know how this would work exactly, Connor, but there could be a situation where an area, local work group, NRD has only projects that fall into the low priority, which we will get to here in a second. And in an effort to make sure we're funding the best of the projects first, we kind of came up with potentially a way to first rank and fund the high and medium priority projects with those local work group allocations. And then after all high and medium priority projects are funded statewide, then we could maybe go into that low priority project pool if necessary. And right now it's somewhat of a moot point because we're kind of getting just enough projects and applications to cover the funding that's allocated. But we do plan to do some more outreach and kind of, I think as NRCS offices understand this funding a little bit more, and the partners such as Game and Parks and Pheasants Forever and the Rainwater Basin Joint Venture, solicit projects that we may come to a point where we can be a little bit more selective, and being more selective is a good thing. And so I thought this might be a good thing to put in place, but Connor, you can hopefully talk to whether this is, I guess, doable within kind of how you how the state office works with funding and ranking and allocating funds. So do you have any comments for us?
Yeah, Eric. Well, first of all, that statement right there, projects in the high and medium priority will be ranked first regardless of allocation. And then after all high and medium priority projects are funded statewide, then low priority may be ranked after notification from myself. So yeah, that's just to confirm that's exactly how it works when we have a statewide initiative or pool, where we also have a screening tool, high, medium, low prioritization. So that is just I mean, that's a rule, I guess, and that field offices get reminded of that through an equip bulletin every fiscal year, and then subsequent reminders to only rank high applications first. So that in doing that, unfortunately, there's no way to rank them all and then distinguish high, medium, lows within CART. So it just takes from myself some direction on, all right, we're only going to rank highs and those will be ranked by this date. And doing that ensures we're funding highs first. So any funds left over after that, then that just takes direction from myself to, okay, we can rank mediums now with the funds we have left over, and I'll pre-approve on down the list. So yeah, that's a good reminder to insert within there. But just for clarification, that is something that everyone should be doing and should be aware of at the beginning of every fiscal year for each pool. So
okay.
So nice work there.
All right. Yeah, I wasn't sure whether that was, I guess, happening because we didn't really have a screening tool necessarily for this fund, but maybe they were using other screening tools that they already are in place.
Yeah. So yeah, for the win prior to, I guess right now, there was no real set high medium designation. And that's why we're talking about it today and looking at this draft version. So I was just going to say I appreciate the effort in developing something like this, because I think the field offices, majority of them would like to see a little bit more. They want to know that they're doing the right thing and slipping an application into the WIN fund code and that it's applicable. So kind of fine tuning it a little more like this helps with that and ensures that. So that's why we're here today, to get input from the group on any high priorities that they would like to see in this draft version, so that we can review it and possibly look at it going forward this way into FY 2022. But at the same time, like we've kind of mentioned, we have 2.4 million to spend, and right now we're just kind of at that cusp, I guess, of having the applications on hand to fund just about everything with that 2.4. So, but as we, get more promoting and whatnot, whether it be through Wetland Restoration, things like that. And I was going to add, Andy, I know you went out you were asking about promotion of, some typical practices that weren't particularly used in WIN before. But Wetland Restoration, I believe you sent out some postcards in October or so, and we actually did get more interest in wetland restoration projects and funded a couple this year, and I hadn't seen that in the past since I've started. So,
all right, thanks, Connor. So I think we'll move down to what we have in here for medium priority. So this list is I guess the next sort of projects that we want to emphasize and prioritize within the WIN fund pool, and for ease of this document, I just kind of listed. So these are any practices that are not listed as high or low. And then I'll go through the practices that are kind of added here. 578 pond, Rich had put together some good guidance on when and when those aren't appropriate. The same with 380 windbreak, and you'll see that language there. One that we have used in certain parts of the state and has been beneficial is the 340 cover crop, only the multi-species scenario, and then along with that access control, and then 528 prescribed grazing when not used with, if they're not using it with the brush management or prescribed fire. So those are some of the medium priorities. And then back to the comment that I have there, with anything, there's going to be gray areas as far as does it fit in the wildlife fund pool? Should it be in the general fund pool? And as we just talked about, we do fund a lot of grazing practices, which is not a bad thing. But inevitably, you'll get a biologist will be presented a project that maybe only includes a few acres of brush management or prescribed fire, but then it's hundreds of acres of grazing practices, and so it really, I guess, shows the need for the biologist involvement, so that they can kind of decipher whether this really is a wildlife practice. And sometimes it's just a gray area that we just need to take a look at, and so it's hard to determine at some point. But I just wanted to throw that comment in there because there is that gray area, and so it's not always cut and dried whether a project that's more geared towards animal production is in fact should be in the wind fund pool. And so it's just something I wanted to point out. Is there any comments, questions about medium priority before we move on?
Yeah, Eric, I just had one question for your 528 prescribed grazing, not used with 314. Did you mean to say 338 for prescribed burning?
Yes, I did. For some reason, I got a number off there, and then it threw off my whole document, and I must have missed that one to change back, because Jenny had pointed that out to me astutely last week. So thank you for that change. Any questions or comments? Rich, I'm still relying on you to check the chat or hand raising. All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the last part of the document, and so this is the low priorities. And one thing that we've talked about with NRCS is when is a biologist approval not required? Are there things that they don't need to look at? And I guess detailing these out puts some onus on us as partners to bring more projects to the table that are high and medium priority projects. But this gives those offices that may not have a lot of interest in maybe those high and medium priority practices, some sort of guidance on what would constitute low priority. So 380 windbreak, that includes like an Easter red cedar planting or other invasive woody species, would of course get at that point that Rich just made. We shouldn't be doing any harm with these projects at the very least. Projects outside of one of those biologically unique landscapes or bird and pheasant plant areas that have minimal wildlife benefit, something like a planting of just a very low diversity single species native planting or something of that nature would be a low priority that would fit into that category. And then just a 578 pond that is strictly more geared towards livestock watering or whatnot, but may have a few fish put in it to satisfy the grandkids sort of thing. So like I said, there are gray areas, and so we tried to include some of those low priorities that come up often. Also included in this are projects that require Corps of Engineers permits, and I'm not. This is a kind of a long-standing, I believe, kind of directive, and I don't know if Rich wants to talk more about that, but I'll go through the rest of these a little more, and then talks about irrigation reuse pits that aren't located in the target watersheds. And I don't know if, Andy, this gets to, if this is in conflict a little bit with what you were just talking about. Hopefully not, but if it does, please speak up. And then there's some information about, how to identify when those reuse pits aren't located in an area that's a priority. And there's a link as well. So, Rich, any comments about those low priority projects?
Yep, I'll jump in with a couple of items. And hopefully I can capture all of them. The reason for the not nationwide 27, but the Corps of Engineers permitting is that at times there becomes a bottleneck. If a permit is needed and it's not readily available, and then we have a contracting issue. We can't get the project implemented, and we're delaying the contract, and that causes challenges with our business tool methodology that we're using. But it's really critical to note that that's not intended to apply to wetland restorations, which qualify for a nationwide 27, or even a stream enhancement type project, which also could be done under nationwide 27. And we've moved to a more of a reporting mechanism for nationwide 27 here in the last year, both us and Game and Parks and some of the other partners. So that can help streamline that. Speaking of wetland restoration, I don't think that, again, it might be confusing to folks, but I don't think it's in conflict. So we would have upland pits that are in priority areas so that we can get water to specific rainwater basin wetlands. And we're doing some of those projects. And then Andy talked about filling a pit in an original Fillmore hydric soil footprint, if you will, which is really more like a restoration. And what I think we are calling out here are pits that are neither of those. They're not in a priority area for us to try to get water down the watershed, and they're not in a old hydric soil footprint where we're actually trying to restore hydrology to an original wetland. And then I see George has his hand up, so that's all I got. We'll ask George for his comments.
George, did you have a comment?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry, there we go. Turn my phone off. It might be echo. I'm traveling. Anytime I see the ponds, it sends shivers up my spine as an aquatic ecologist. So I urge you to be careful with developing ponds for wetland restorations. I've seen this in the sandhills where flowing water systems have been converted to still water habitat, and there's a drastic change in fish community structure. So I just caution you on this. So
sure.
Thanks.
No, I appreciate those comments, George. I think they're valid, and we're gaining ground collectively, I think, within the agency on altering those systems and the impacts that has, and also being able to use different techniques now, like rock chutes and stuff in sandhills regions where we can still accomplish our grade control objectives, but not create impounded water.
Yeah, appreciate it, George. Any other questions or comments about the low priorities?
Yeah, this is Ed Hubbs again. I've got a question on the cedar, the windbreak with cedar being in here. With that one, just a question about this says no biologist approval necessary. I'm just wondering if that's not the kind of case where you would want a biologist to be involved, because of all the other discussions we have around cedars, that you wouldn't want to have a biologist involved with this just to help determine or help, look into future problems down the road that could come from it.
This may be better answered by Rich, but I'll take a stab. Well, and there's, yes, I agree, Ed, and I guess hopefully this document gets us to a point where, everyone that's involved in these applications is familiar with what we're not wanting, and so these low priorities, get put in some other, in the general fund pool, or funded through some other program. And so I do understand your concern, though, and we could potentially talk about that. Rich, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the context of the comment or the phrase that's used in this document, Eric, is that we don't want the biologists spending time on the low priority projects because we want them to focus on the highs and mediums, in the assumption that we're only going to fund the highs and the mediums. But I think it is maybe duly noted, Ed, that if the instance would arise that we are going to fund anything in the low, that those be approved or evaluated or scrutinized, if nothing else, by myself, if not other partners.
Eric, Honor, I think we just work on the wording for that maybe a little bit.
Sure.
Because yes, we still want biologist approval for a low priority if we get down to those.
And one of the things we struggled with a little bit this year with the timing and the nature of how funds were distributed in a different way, as Connor pointed out, was trying to make sure that we had biologist involvement early in the process rather than after the fact. So some of this wording came about from the standpoint of, well, let's focus the time being spent on the so-called better projects, assuming that we can just sort of set aside these lower quality projects, again, in the event that we hopefully don't end up funding any of them as we move into the future. The question has already also come up, or the concept of maybe there are certain types of projects that are just boom, voila, that's exactly what we want. Do we need, quote, biologist approval? And so we get into the semantics a little bit of, do we have biologist involvement? Are they actually granting approval? And I would point to the pit fill effort in the Rainwater Basin as a good example of that. I mean, that's been developed by biologists to prioritize the watersheds that we want to do pit fills in, and even prioritize the pits within those. So you might argue, well, why do we need to even have a biologist review or approve of those contracts? And so it's something that I'm interested in some feedback on. A similar scenario that we haven't granted that to is, let's say we're working in a grassland dominated landscape and we're doing prescribed burning and brush management. I mean, it's kind of sort of a no-brainer. It's probably going to, no matter how you do it and implement it, it's probably going to result in a net gain or a positive for wildlife.
All right, thanks, Rich. I agree, yep. And it would be good to be able to get to that point. So, if others have comments or input on that, feel free to, I guess, to say it now or send Rich and I an email or whatnot with your input.
Andy had his hand up briefly, so
okay. I guess one thing I'd offer is we're developing some breeding bird survey species distribution models and population models that might be able to highlight the little brown birds, western meadowlarks, dick thistles, etc. Some of the priority species we have within our land bird that we're developing on a statewide basis, the models, but it could show us the priority areas where we've got, 25% of the landscape has 50% of the population. And so we might be able to do some additive stacking on those. And then we've also got the prairie grouse modeling we're doing with the Game and Parks Commission. And, so I think there's going to be some ways we could bring in some, grassland bird prioritization tools if the work group would like it, if NRCS would like those tools to be made available. And we'll make sure and run those by all the, hopefully we could use the state tech committee and the wildlife subgroup as a review panel for those tools.
Great. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. I think using those tools, we could develop something that's parallel, if you will, to the way we do pit fills and the work that Dylan talked about, where we're, all right, here's the target areas we want to work in. We're going to use these practices to meet those objectives, and having the wildlife information embedded in with that cedar invasion stuff would be useful.
All right, great. Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing. We got about 9 minutes left. Is there anything else, anything that we've talked about that a question has come up in someone's as we've gone through this? Any other topics that anybody wants to mention for the group? Oh, I see Scott has his hand up. I assume that's Wessel, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's me. I just have maybe a general suggestion that maybe sometime before next fall, if local work groups are able to get together with their biologists and maybe go through some of this stuff that we talked about today, go back through some of the training that we received on wind, that might be a way to start, getting all of us a little more familiar with the process and maybe get out ahead of things a little bit. I mean, it'll take some time, but I know there were a handful of biologists like in the Middle Niobrara that talked about, have already informally talked about the practices that they think they'll see in future wind projects, and trying to just get on the same page with each other about how to approach these things. So just an idea.
Thanks, Scott. I think that has been thrown around, and Rich and I have talked about potentially, or Rich has thrown out the need for maybe 2 local work group meetings a year instead of the one, to better disseminate information in a more timely manner. So appreciate that. Okay, I saw that Jana from FSA is on here. I think Levine was. I'm not sure if she is. Jana, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Is there anything, just because I know this group would be interested, anything about potentially timing for the CRP sign up?
Hey, Eric, there is not. They've got to redo all of our software, and as we all know, software is a painful process usually. I know that they're going to come out with more information. I don't think we'll have anything start back up in May. We're already in the last of May. I'm hoping in the next couple weeks or first couple weeks of June, we'll get a little more information, but we're pretty much at a standstill now until we get those updates from the national office that software has been updated to open everything back up. We do know there's no safe though. We're not able to do either migratory bird safe or the upland bird safe this year. So that's not going to be available until October 1st. Hopefully we'll be able to explore those options and open that back up when we start the new fiscal year. So we know SAFE is kind of off the board for any signing up this year, but otherwise we're, like I said, software, waiting for that to get all wrapped up so they can open things back up again.
Okay, I appreciate it. And looks like Andy's got a question.
No, I just wanted to dovetail with Jana. We just got an email from headquarters that said, you know, probably an October 31st sign up for our migratory bird safe, but it looks like they are planning on including or trying to modify and improve the PIP, the SIP, or the PIP and the clear, as well as the inflationary payment on our safe. So SAFE might be the most lucrative CRP program in the nation. So thanks again to Jana and Levain for helping us get that over the finish line before the announcement. And now hopefully we'll get the new CRP bonuses incorporated into that. I don't know, Jana, you got anything else on that?
No, I'm sure we'll be able to take advantage of those new incentives, which is great. It's making CRP, I think, be a lot more lucrative. We're getting more like a 50% PIP, which we've never had. So that's great news. I think SAFE moving into a continuous sign up instead of general is amazing. That's going to open up the door. I think we'll have a lot more SAFE enrollment since they're not going to have to bid in for upland game bird safe, I should say. So all really promising things. I like all the extra incentives we're getting out there. So it's just a matter of getting our software updated and finalizing everything to push it out and open things up again.
Jan, I want to add also that another highlight for us to get more enrollment or acceptance in enrollment, even general, is that 3 million acres will be expiring in the next 2 years nationwide. So, and in Nebraska, we'll have probably close to 200,000 in the next couple years that'll be expiring. So I think that's going to be a little more with all these incentives. They're going to start taking more, especially under our general where those are ranked, and same with grasslands. But I just kind of want to highlight that area as well as a highlight.
All right. Thanks, Jana and Levain, for that. I guess with that, last call for comments or questions. I don't see anything in the chat. No hands raised. Andy had to get one final last word in.
I just wanted to let the group know we will be having that a World Wildlife Fund agreement for $1.3 million that will be able to help us with pollinator work on either CRP or other grassland restoration practices. So I just wanted to plant the seed that we will have some additional extra funding that could help augment both CRP as well as grassland restorations, irregardless of the partner. So I think there's new opportunities coming. I don't have very many details yet. We've got a prospectus into World Wildlife Fund, but $1.3 million for additional cost share for, seeding and grassland establishment. And hopefully that might help some producers, get over that hump on CRP to go to that more diverse mix, or just producers that are, trying to restore grasslands. So.
All right.
Thanks for the opportunity. I promise I'll be quiet now.
Don't make promises you can't keep, Andy. Come on. All right. Well, we're right at time, so I appreciate everybody joining us. It's been a good meeting. We'll get to work on that draft. Connor, do you have some parting words?
Just not much, Eric, except for thank you. Especially thanks for your work on the screening tool and going over that and getting some input. I would like to work with you and Rich, and particularly going forward with that before we get into 2022 here. So I'll set something up for that. But other than that, good discussion, and thanks for hosting.
All right. Appreciate it, Connor. Appreciate, Rich, your input as well. And we'll let everybody go. Thanks a lot, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.